Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
Welcome back to Resilience and Resolve with attorney Lance Drury. For more than 30 years, Lance has helped small business owners and individuals regain control when IRS problems feel overwhelming. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're addressing a question many business owners quietly worry about: when business tax debt stays with the business and when it follows you personally. Lance, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Evan. How are you today?
I'm good, man. We're getting a steady dose of Lance Drury for the past, for a little bit,
You lucky dog, you.
Lance, many business owners assume their company structure protects them personally, but in reality, when can the IRS still come after that individual?
Well, Evan, if you're incorporated or you have an LLC, unless you're a one-person LLC and it flows through your tax returns, you're protected, except, let's say you're incorporated and you owe $100,000 in payroll tax. So let's say the business can't pay it. It can only pay part of it. Or let's say the business is now defunct. There's no assets or income in the business, so the IRS now cannot go after the business because there's nothing there to get. But here's the deal. For unpaid payroll taxes, the IRS can impose what's called the trust fund civil penalty. And what that is the portion of the total payroll tax that's attributable to the employee. That's 50 to 60% of the total tax. So out of that $100,000 payroll tax liability that they're looking at the corporation for, now if they impose the trust fund penalty, they can come after you personally for $50,000 to $60,000. And the significance of that is now they can come after your personal assets. Now they can come after your personal income. So that's the problem, because they figure you held that money in trust for the employee. And of course, the employee is going to use that on their taxes. So the IRS loses the money more than once. And the other thing is unpaid payroll tax is their highest priority. I went to a seminar once, and one of the former heads of the Internal Revenue Service said, she's sympathetic to people, but not these businesses who continue to pyramid payroll tax liability. They're going to want you shut down. So you've got to start being compliant moving forward on your payroll taxes, or you're going to have big problems sooner or later with Uncle Sam.
And with that being said, though, Lance, how does the IRS view personal responsibility differently for the sole proprietors, the partnerships, and the corporations?
Well, again, the corporations is a separate legal entity. They can't come after the total payroll tax. But if you're a sole proprietor and you have unpaid payroll tax, you're 100% liable for that, because that's the reasons why people incorporate or set up these different vehicles, so they're not personally liable. So if you have that corporation, you can shield your personal liability, except if it's unpaid payroll tax, they can still come after you personally for the 50 to 60% portion of the payroll tax that's attributable to the employee. So you still got to watch it. If you've got a corporation, you need to pay those payroll taxes. They take high priority with the IRS, and even at a very low level, the IRS is going to assign a revenue officer. Normally, you have to owe $250,000 or more to get a revenue officer involved on personal tax liability. But if it's payroll taxes, they can come in if it's $40,000, $50,000, because they want to clean that up right away.
But beyond payroll taxes, Lance, what kind of business-related tax debts are most likely to create that personal exposure?
Well, I don't know that there is any other type of business debt that can create personal exposure. Certainly 1120 liability is not going to do it. That's the corporate income. And if the business goes defunct, there's nothing there unless there's assets or income left in the business. Maybe there's bank accounts. Maybe there's equipment that can be sold. But other than that, there's nothing going to be there in terms of the corporation for the IRS to come after if you owe 1120 liability. and they cannot come after you personally for the corporate income tax liability. That is one good thing about setting up a corporate shield. They can't come after you for that, but they can for the trust fund portion of the unpaid payroll tax.
But Lance, what tends to happen when business owners rely too heavily on that entity structure without understanding how the IRS actually enforces collection?
Well, I don't think a lot of business owners understand that they can come after you personally for unpaid payroll taxes if the corporation is unable to pay all those payroll taxes back. And so what happens a lot of times is, they'll set up an agreement for the corporation, but it may not be for all of those payroll taxes because the business doesn't have the ability to pay all those back. And so then what they'll do is to go after the person individually. They'll perform what's called a trust fund penalty interview. None of my clients do that. I don't let my clients go in because it's like they're confessing to a felony, because the statute to say that you're a responsible party for imposing the trust fund civil penalty is identical to the federal statute for tax evasion. So none of my clients will submit to that, and it doesn't make any difference. In a small business, they know who the responsible party is. It's the person who runs the business and knew or should have known that the taxes weren't being paid. And if you're an officer or a president, you have a fiduciary obligation to know whether or not the taxes are being paid. I've had people that turn the running of the business over to somebody else. They just ran it. They own the company. The employee didn't even file the payroll taxes. And so then he ends up dying. He finds out all this after the guy that runs the place is deceased, and they're coming after him for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he didn't know anything about it. But guess what? He's the president of the corporation. He had an obligation to know what's going on with the company. That's true for me, Evan. Whatever happens with any of my employees, with any of my attorneys, guess who's ultimately responsible? I am, and that's true for any business. So if you own a business, you have to be aware of these things.
Okay. And Lance, you work with owners who were shocked to learn they were personally on the hook. Can you share a situation where that realization changed how a case had to be handled?
Well, I don't know if there was any realization in terms of how the case had to be handled. It's just that in addition to having to deal with the payroll tax at the corporate level, they were also trying to deal with the trust fund civil penalty at the personal level. So it could create two different types. Now, the good thing is, Evan, is that it's not an additional tax. It's part of the payroll tax. So for every dollar that you pay down on the trust fund civil penalty, your personal, and we generally recommend people pay down on that first because their personal assets, their personal income are exposed until they do that. Every time they pay $1 down on the trust fund, the payroll goes down by $1.
Wow.
So it's not like it's a whole different tax. And sometimes when you're dealing with a revenue officer, what you can do, but not always, you can set up an agreement with the corporation. You can set up an agreement with the personal, and they'll roll it together so that there's just one payment that's coming out each month. But you never know. It just depends on who you deal with. But you really have to be cognizant of a lot of things if you own your own business. Evan, people think running your own business is the American dream.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, 75 to 80% of small businesses either don't make it or they're not all that profitable. They make less than 6 figures a year, less than 80,000 a year. You got to pay your own health insurance. You got to fund your own retirement. You got to work long hours. And, you come home at night at 7:00, and the last thing those people want to do is paperwork. So that's the other thing that gets people in trouble. And they don't have the ability to hire somebody else to take care of that for them because the business isn't all that profitable.
So, Lance, how does the timing of a business closure or restructuring affect whether the IRS pursues personal collection?
Well, obviously, if you close the business down and there's no money there to pay the payroll tax, they're going to come after you personally for the trust fund civil penalty. They're not going to get all their money back, but if the business is defunct, and in a lot of cases, the business has been defunct for years, there's nothing in the business, there's no income, there's no assets, there's no accounts receivable, there's no equipment left. They have no choice then but to try to recoup some of that by going after people personally. So that's what they do. And, a lot of people don't realize that when they first get involved with this, but you have to be cognizant of that. You have to understand that because that's the huge risk. So when you go into business for yourself, you better pay attention to those things. You better pay attention to all the paperwork that you have to comply with. You better pay attention to what you have to do to stay in Uncle Sam's good graces with the IRS, or you're going to get in big trouble.
Mm. So, so what role does compliance play in limiting that personal exposure once business tax debt exists, Lance?
Well, I don't know if I understand your question completely, but if you're complying at the business level,
Right.
you never have to worry about the IRS coming after you personally for any unpaid payroll taxes. As long as the business is 100% compliant, moving forward, and it doesn't have any liability in the past, you don't have to worry about the IRS coming after you personally for anything. So, that's the deal. And we talked about this the other day, Evan, I think maybe on Monday. You know, as long as you stay compliant, you never have to worry about the IRS wiping out your bank account,
Right.
taking 90% of your take-home pay, 100% of your 1099s, or if you're a business, you don't have to worry about them going against your accounts receivable. And that can be devastating for a business because guess what? One of your clients gets this notice saying if you owe this taxpayer money who owes taxes to Uncle Sam, you got to send that money to us if you owe them that money. They don't want to have to deal with this. And guess what? They're going to go to somebody else. They don't want to have you. They don't want to be a client of yours if they got to go through this extra paperwork all the time. So that's another reason why you have to stay on the straight and narrow with the IRS.
Mm. You talked about different things in this episode, but what makes it easier for the IRS to argue that an owner should be personally responsible?
Well, there is a thing, and normally in a small business, it's not that difficult. Whoever owns the business, runs it. The thing is and the reason why you don't want to submit to that trust fund penalty interview is I've seen people who have gotten involved in that simply because they sign payroll checks for the business. So if there's, and they would not probably know that unless they went out and subpoenaed bank records or whatever. But, when they go through this trust fund penalty interview, they try to get as many people involved as possible. So they ask all kinds of questions about who else was involved in the operation of the business, who signed the checks, who was responsible for payroll. And the reason that you don't want to submit is you're going to implicate other people, perhaps, for that trust fund penalty. And now they can come after more than one person to try to get back those trust fund monies.
Mm. And Lance, for a business owner dealing with tax debt right now, what should they understand about personal risk before deciding their next move?
Well, if you're a business owner, what you got to do is you got to make sure you're compliant. You got to make sure that you're paying your taxes on time, you're filing on time. Then you don't ever have to worry about the IRS coming after you for the trust fund civil penalty and having your personal assets and your personal income subject to IRS scrutiny. So stay on the straight and narrow, set up a payment plan on any back taxes, stay compliant moving forward, and you'll be fine.
Mm. Thanks, Lance. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Evan. It's always a great pleasure to see you.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury. Business tax debt doesn't always stay contained inside the business, and understanding where personal responsibility begins can prevent costly surprises later. If you're facing IRS issues connected to your business and want guidance before things escalate, visit lancedrurylaw.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.